Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 1 discussion. You might notice here that we've got a substantial spreadsheet of different ways that you can make currency at the start of patch 3.29. That is what I want to go through in this video. I think one of the things a lot of people take in as their mindset when they're going into a new league is, I want to play XYZ build. And that's cool. What Atlas are you playing with it? Instead, I want to encourage you to think of a synergistic pairing. Atlas plus build equals currency. You don't have one build that you're playing and then you just do whatever for the Atlas, maybe copy the same as someone else that's playing a very different build. Instead, you want to pick an area of content that the build that you're intending to play is uniquely effective at. Or alternately, if you've decided on an area of content you're interested in playing, maybe that comes first and then your choice of build is something that you pair to that. You will find that you'll be much more successful at league start if you harmonize a build and an area of content that work well together. For example, I am planning on going Penance Brand Ignite Elementalist. That's my plans for this league, and that is something that does Breach very well. So I'm going to be starting out with a bit of a focus on Breach. One of the things that the Path of Exile community tends to do is overreact to nerfs a bit, and that means a lot of people will be dropping Breach. And at the same time, while a lot of people are dropping Breach, they're still going to want the Breach exclusive unique items, such as that Foulborn Ramirez ring that I think a lot of people have on their wish list for Winter Orb builds. So this is my plan. This is what I'm going to be doing. And you can see that I haven't just picked a build. I haven't just picked an area of content. I picked two that I think work reasonably well together. In this guide, I want to go through a whole bunch of different things that you can do in order to generate currency. I think it was 59 last time I checked. And I want to look at what sorts of aspects of characters are pressured by them. And then once you're aware of that, then that means that you can then choose a build that is good at those particular things. For example, most things involving doing legions inside maps, it's not so important to do 20 million DPS to one target, but it is very important to be able to do 1 million DPS to 20 targets. So bow builds, for instance, are quite good there. A couple other quick pointers I wanted to make. If you've got no idea what build you're interested in using at all, then you could check out Tuadh's build, where he took 14 builds up to the Searing Exarch and the Eater of Worlds. So just an early into endgame, just getting a real foothold into the real endgame, but 14 different builds is a lot, and Tuadh's got a big review that I'll put a link to down in the description below. Definitely worth checking that video out. Another thing of note is that there is a good resource online, and this comes from VT Sachs, Reddit user, as to which scarabs were particularly rare in patch 3.28. For example, did you know that the two rarest scarabs in the game are Horn Scarab of Preservation, you probably have guessed that one, but also Horn Scarab of Tradition, which was never particularly valuable. At the same time, the much more popular Breach Scarab of Resonant Cascade, whilst it's rare, it's nothing compared to that in rarity. So the information that we've got here on screen is what came out from vendoring 100,000 scarabs, because there is a 3-for-1 vendor recipe on scarabs. And you'll notice here that scarabs fall into 5 different rarity categories. One of them is the ones that got single figures of at most. That is the extreme scarabs. The mythic scarabs, these are the ones that VT Sachs got approximately 20 of. The rare scarabs, approximately 200. The uncommon scarabs, approximately 400. And the common scarabs, approximately 600. And there's like a couple that you're maybe not sure which of two groups they're in, but most of them are pretty clear from this. So I want to warn you, if you're going to be using a lot of mythic scarabs or a massive amount of rare scarabs, so that you can plan for that. And none of these strategies use any of the known extreme rarity scarabs. The other thing that may have you questioning what I'm on about is this astrolabe column. With astrolabes, people probably know this, areas that are affected by an astrolabe cannot drop astrolabes. So what this means is that if you're spending astrolabes, you are not generating any of them. But if you are not spending astrolabes and you're running high tier maps, then you've got a chance of getting astrolabes. So you become a generator of astrolabes. There's also a couple of ways that you can become an extreme generator of astrolabes, and that's by doing the Pinnacle bosses that always drop them. And there's only 3 of those Pinnacle bosses. The Incarnation of Fear, the Incarnation of Neglect, the Incarnation of Dread. All 3 of those always drop an astrolabe except the first time you fight them, and that's something that you can do. They also have Uber versions, and they also have that going for them as well. So that's what we're talking about here with the astrolabe section. Anyways, I want to start by looking at the Legion mechanic. And as I see it, there are really 3 ways that you can engage with the Legion mechanic in 3.29. Now, Legion is getting a huge change, and there may be things that aren't known yet that might also change this further. But in terms of things we can count on, you can go into in-map Legion events, and you can try to kill every single monster there. With this, you're going to need to kill the generals, because the generals have had some loot moved to them. So in this strategy, you might be using the Legion Scarab of Timeless Conflict. You'll also be using the more common Legion Scarabs. The only rare Scarab you're going to be using here is that Mythic Scarab, the Legion Scarab of Timeless Conflict. The rest of them are all rare or lower. You're going to be spending a medium amount of time in each map, and here, this is going to pair exceptionally well with fast events such as altars, or things like Heist, things that you can just get done fast. But one open question that we've got here, the Enshrouding Crystals and the Emblems, we don't know what their drop rates are going to be like. So that's something that you'll need to keep in mind. I do think that in Trade League, there'll be a bit of a fluctuation here where the rarer they are, the more the price will go up, and they'll roughly balance out. The big thing that's pressured by this style of Legion play is damage projection. And for that reason, I think a bow is a pretty good way to play this. You don't have to play it as a bow build. There's plenty of other choices that you can make, but it is something that is really solid. A second option is actually an easier version of this. So here, forget about using an astrolabe, absolutely forget about it. Absolutely forget about using the Legion Scarab of Timeless Conflict. You're only going to be using cheaper scarabs on this approach, and you're focusing on the loot tiles. So this is the little icons over monsters' heads, mostly on the sergeants and the generals, and you just go into the Legion, you initiate the encounter, and you wipe out all the monsters that have got those loot tile effects, and you go and scoop their loot. This can be an extremely fast way of running Legion, but I want to put out a little bit of a warning here. This has been a good way to play Legion in the past. It may be meaningfully worse in 3.29. First reason for this, incubators are gone. So if it's day one, 6-link incubators, nah, they're just not there anymore. And they were a significant part of the loot for day one Legion. The other thing that's noticeable is that also some of the loot has been moved to the generals. So this is an option, but it's not one that I'm going to guarantee works all that well. Everything's up in the air here. Build-wise, again, this is just pressuring damage projection, and bows and Vaal Ice Nova would be two things I would consider here. The reason I call out Vaal Ice Nova specifically is that in the Legion League proper, this was the best way to farm Legion content, and Vaal Ice Nova was absolutely incredible there. Vaal Ice Nova has also had a significant buff in patch 3.29. Now, you may have noticed I have been playing footage from the Domain of Timeless Conflict in Legion. This is another thing that you can potentially engage with here. Now, the Domain of Timeless Conflict is hard. This is the current game version of the unrelenting Domain of Timeless Conflict. It's not an exact one-for-one comparison, but that's what it's more a spiritual successor to. What this means is that if you're specializing in this content, you're going to be using other players' Enshrouding Crystals, using other players' Timeless Emblems, and you're going to be trading for those from other players, then going into the domain and trying to get lucky on those Enshrouding Crystals. This is something that's taking place outside maps, so you're not engaging with any other mechanics. The big aspects of characters that are going to get pressured here, and there's a lot. Firstly, you're going to want to have some sort of crowd control for lethal trash mobs. And here I think the best way is freeze proliferation, but if you can get powerful enough that you can just kill monsters with one hit, that's even better. The most powerful debuff that you can apply to a monster is dead. The second most powerful is freeze. You're also going to need to have a character that is tanky against unusual types of damage. So you need to be able to deal with high chaos damage hits, but you also need to be able to deal with extreme amounts of elemental penetration. Now, the best way, I believe, to deal with high amounts of elemental penetration is through a character that is using Divine Flesh as a keystone. Divine Flesh will cause 50% of the damage that is taken by you that's elemental to instead be applied as chaos damage. You can also stack this with the unique chest Incandescent Heart, which will give you 25% more of the same stat. At this point, if you've got 75% fire res and an enemy hits you for 10,000 fire damage that has 50% fire penetration on it. So this is a massive, massive hit. What's going to happen if you didn't have all of this conversion to chaos? You would take 7,500 real damage because your effective fire resistance against that damage is going to be 25%. 75% minus 50%. But when it's chaos damage, even assuming that you've only got 80% chaos res, which is what you're likely to have with Divine Flesh, then in that case, 75% of the damage attacks your chaos resistance. that's going to do 1500 damage to you. The remaining 25% is then going to attack your fire resistance, and it's going to deal 1875 damage to you. All in all, it's a hard hit, but it's one that you can survive. So, Divine Flesh and Incandescent Heart provides a unique defensive setup alongside capped or overcapped chaos resistance that will help you handle the unique challenges that are posed by the Domain of Timeless Conflict. This may not be something you can get set up on day one. You're going to need a specific Timeless Duel in order to get Divine Flesh. You're going to need to then build some extra maximum chaos resistance into your character, which not the hardest thing in the world, but not free either. And you're also going to need to get Incandescent Heart and lots of damage, because just because these monsters can't one-shot you doesn't mean that they can't kill you if they get multiple attacks off. So yeah, some tough stuff there, but let's move on from Legion and let's move on to Heist. Heist is an interesting one. I'm actually going to suggest 4 possible strategies here, but I do want to warn you that these are going to be ones that get old quickly, or at least one of them is good all league, but the rest of them may not be so good all league. So the first option that you've got is to do in-map heist events. So this is the mapping strategy. Here, you're an astrolabe generator. You're going to be going into maps. You're going to be rushing to all of the heist snuggle caches. You're going to be collecting those juicy blueprints to then either run yourself later or to sell to other players. And you're also going to kill a map boss and potentially generate yourself some astrolabes. At the same time, you can also be picking any of the really good juicy altars that might appear. And you can do other fast events inside your maps. Maybe you've got the DPS to do this alongside beast farming, for example, or you can do some sort of map boss targeting, which may or may not involve destructive play. That said, I would suggest usually for Heist, you probably want to do one map over and over again, which then ends up ruling out destructive play in most circumstances. Now here, you want to be doing your maps fast. You don't want to be spending much time in them, so you don't want to pair this with something like Ultimatum that is then going to cause your map to be extremely slow. In fact, it's just a general rule of thumb. You never want to have more than one mechanic that takes a lot of time in any given map. The aspects of your character that are pressured here are just move speed. There's nothing really more to it than that. You want to be fast. That's all you need to be. And for that reason, I think that a lot of Pathfinder builds are really good here, but the specific Pathfinder build you choose is up to you. Toxic Rain is a popular one, but you don't need to go with what's popular. You just need to go with something that's fast. The next high strategy is very much a day one strategy only, and this is the side chest farm. So inside contracts, as well as the contract goal that you've got, you can also just go in and grab the side chests and leave. Now, there are 3 specific chests that are worth targeting with this, and they're not the ones that are valuable later in the league. The first of these is level 75 plus Counter Thaumaturgy chests. Why 75 plus and why Counter Thaumaturgy? Counter Thaumaturgy has gem chests. 75 plus, in my experience, the gem chest rewards are much better. What happens there, and I think 75 is the right breakpoint, but if you don't get good results from it, then maybe just try a couple of levels higher, a couple of levels lower. But what you'll see is that when you open a gem chest and you get unlucky, you will get the game disgorging a whole bunch of gems on you. Most of these will have medium quality, some of them will have high quality, and some will have 20 quality. That seems to be the breakpoint though at 75, where you start seeing more 20 qualities, more high qualities like 18 and 19, and fewer that are medium quality, 13, 14, 15, 16. The thing is that early league, people are looking for gems that have got quality on them, and these end up being something you can sell, especially through asynchronous trade. But on top of this, that's what you get when you're unlucky. When you're lucky, you're also going to get a stack of GCPs, and those really can add up. So here, the resources you're going to be consuming for this version of the farm are heist contracts and markers, and the heist contracts you're consuming will be Counter Thaumaturgy ones. However, you can also do level 68 agility or level 68 engineering. And here, all I say by 68 is 68 plus. These will have essence chests in them. Now with the essence chests, there is a small bonus that you actually get to loot a bunch of essences. They're not important. The thing you're there for is the essence scarabs. Essence scarabs have a very high drop rate. If you're running 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, then the only essence scarabs allowed to drop are the classic essence scarab. If you jump to 73 and higher, so let's start with 73 to 77 first, half of your essence scarabs will change, and they will change to one of the middle tier essence scarabs. Of these, 2/3 of them will be the least desirable of the Essence Scarabs, but 1/3 will be the Essence Scarab of Ascent. And it turns out that this is basically about the same. Doing them in yellow tier maps is about the same as doing them in white tier maps, because for every 3 Essence Scarabs that you lose to this change, you get 1 Essence Scarab of Ascent, and they're usually worth about 3 times as much as a base Scarab. But at the same time, you'll also end up with 2 of the Stability Scarabs, and they tend to be pretty hard to sell if you can sell them at all. Things get better again once you get to level 78 plus. If you can do 78 plus, what you'll find there is that you will also very rarely get an Essence Scarab of Calcification or an Essence Scarab of Adaptation. These are not super common, but they are a nice little bonus when you get them, especially if it happens to be Calcification. So, this is the Heist side chest farm. There are people who will do other variants of this, but this is the one that I think is best on day one. Later on, I don't think these side chests are really worth targeting right now. That's based on what we know going into the league. Of course, things may change. Here, what's going to be pressured is your movement speed, so that you can take a copy of this. But this is all about move speed, and you just want to be a Pathfinder for this. I think that's the best option, but don't feel that you can't run this on a different type of character. All of this is very much predicated on Grinding Gear Games not making any stealth changes to the drop rates here, because it is the case that the Essence Scarabs, they do drop a lot of these. If you do find that they're not so great, then at that point you might want to shift into the next option, which is running blueprints. Now, with blueprints, there's a couple of types of target loot you're looking for. Later in the league, it's replica of unique items that are good, and also premium base types. When I say premium base types, if you're unlucky, this is like a pneumatic dagger or an oscillating scepter. These are genuinely good items. People will want them, but they're common enough that they're not generally worth a lot. If you are moderately lucky, you'll get something like a helical ring. And if you're staggeringly lucky, then you'll get a simplex amulet or a focused amulet, both of which are phenomenal. If you're playing the blueprint strategy, then you are going to be trading for blueprints and deception contracts from other players. You can use other contracts, but they are far inferior to deception contracts. And then you'll be running those contracts back to back fast, completing them. And then after that, you'll be unveiling wings, but not additional side rooms of your blueprints. Again, you're not really using any rare resources here, and you're not in maps, so it doesn't really pair very well with anything, except to say that the day one side chest farm is a good way to sort of build yourself up to doing blueprints later. With blueprints, because the loot can be a bit more valuable and a bit more important, tankiness matters a bit more. And also in blueprints, because you're able to bring 3 of the Heist rogues with you, it is more important to gear them up. That's not so important in the earlier farms, but for this one it is. After this, we got something completely experimental. And this is, you could potentially try to farm Chromatic Orbs in Heist. I do not know if this is going to be good, so go into this with an open mind. We're going to try this, then potentially walk away from it if it's no good. Chromatic Orbs might be expensive next league. We don't know the details of exactly how rare they're going to be. So in the off chance they are really expensive, there is a new Trinket mod that will upgrade Fusing Orbs or Jeweler's Orbs into Chromatic Orbs. You're going to need one of those. Then you're going to go in and do the same side chest farm, but this time you're going to be looking for armor and weapon chests. These drop large amounts of socket modifying currency normally, and there will be a chance for that to upgrade into Chromatic Orbs. We've just got to work out whether this is worth it or not. For now, I don't recommend this, but I do recommend that you have it on your radar. If it turns out that Chromatics are really expensive at some point, maybe it's something to jump to. After this, we're going to jump to the mechanic that was patch 3.3, Incursion. Incursion, this is all about generating temples that have double corruption chambers. This is going to be much better this league. And the reason for this is that our patch notes this league have a whole bunch of changes that entail Vaal implicits getting buffed, and at the same time, the mechanic that they compete with the most, which is synthesis loot, that is getting completely and utterly deleted. So, this is going to be something where you're going to want to spec Elva on the tree. When you're able to do so, you will want to use the Mythic Scarab, Incursion Scarab of Timelines, but it's not critical. That's something that makes the strategy faster, but it's also something you can do the strategy without. And you want to just not spend too much time on other things inside your maps. Now, this is going to work well with any strategy that rewards exploring the whole map. A good example here is Heist. Heist puts a bunch of points of interest onto the map, and you're going to want to explore the whole map as well as doing those fast events. Altars can be good here. or alternately, you could go destructive play if you're quite familiar with a bunch of different maps. Additionally, you're going to be killing map bosses, so you're going to be a small generator of astrolabes as well. Here, you want to balance movement speed and damage projection. You don't really need heavy damage for Incursion Temple generation. You also don't need to be heavily tanky. For that reason, I feel like the Berserker Slam builds are very, very good in this setup. Berserker Slam builds, they can hit pretty much the whole screen at once, which is great. And because the monsters inside Incursions tend to be pretty soft, that will wipe them all out. And on top of that, Berserkers just move really fast. So that's something I would suggest as a good option there. Bestiary is the next one, while we're still focusing on some of these mechanics that are tied to League NPCs. Here, your goal is catching beasts. And this time, this is all up in the air because we have no idea whether the new talismans are going to end up being popular at endgame or not. Now, I think they'll be definitely something people will use for a while, but they are competing with a lot of other mechanics. So they're competing with Rog. Rog generates very early game amulets that can be quite good. They're competing with some excellent unique amulets, but most of all, they're competing with a Blight Anointed Heist rare amulet. And those Heist rare amulets are really, really strong. So, Bestiary, the talismans are a bit hit and miss. We'll see where they come up. But at the same time, though, there's a bunch of other things that come out of this. Scarabs-wise, you are going to want to use Einhar's Better Scarabs, the one that duplicates beasts and the one that adds 5 red beasts. And whilst these scarabs are only uncommon, you can use a lot of them. So for that reason, you might find that you are putting up buy orders for these scarabs quite aggressively. Here, you want to be pairing this with things that involve exploring the map and doing fast other events. I do think this is nerfed overall. A lot of the things that have been really good in the past in Bestiary just aren't so important anymore. The things that this is going to pressure your character for, you want soft bossing. And what I mean by soft bossing here, you don't need to be someone that can kill the heaviest bosses in the game, but you do want to be able to just take down a boss that has a moderate number of hit points without spending too long doing it, and that's going to be really useful for you. Additionally, you want move speed again. One thing I will say, every single time that I say that the aspects of your character pressured include move speed, you probably want to consider helping Creighton in the campaign. Now, if you need to get something else, maybe you can't do that, but helping Creighton can be really strong here because, yeah, sure, you might be 4 or 5% behind on DPS, but 8% move speed is better than 4% DPS if you're looking to carry out some sort of strategy that involves movement speed. Berserker Slam ends up working really well when it comes to beast farming. It's not the only option. After this, we're going to jump over to Delve. Delve has multiple different strategies, and here we've got the Shallow Fossil Hunt, the Deep Boss Hunt, and the Golem Jewel Hunt. So, the Shallow Fossil Hunt. Here, you don't go particularly deep in the mines. You hunt for dense fossils, and you hunt for other fossils that can then be harvest swapped into dense fossils by yourself or by someone else. And all you really need for this is a tiny number of Delve Scarabs, or even just running maps without them. You're not going to be consuming other players' resources, but you're also not really going to be generating astrolabes much either. And when you do run maps, they're just going to be fast ones. Delve is mostly an off-atlas thing, so this isn't going to pair well with anything. Movement speed and recovery are pressured the most if you're doing shallow fossil hunting. And what you're looking for here is you go out into the darkness and you hunt for fossils wherever they might be. And generally speaking, this seems to be best about depth 351. There is a breakpoint. I think it's 351, but it might be 301. At that point, you will start seeing stacks of multiple fossils, not just stacks of one, that are on the pathway in various spots. The further that you can go, it is still going to get better, but the further that you go, the more you're going to have to start compromising, sacrificing some of your movement speed in order to be tankier, or sacrificing some of your movement speed in order to be able to kill monsters a bit more effectively. And ultimately, the shallow fossil hunt isn't about doing that. The deep boss hunt, on the other hand, that is. The deep boss hunt is where you dig deep, at least depth 800, potentially much further, and you go looking for the bosses, all the Crystal King. You're looking for precursor emblems and the components that make them up. You're looking for rare fossils. You're looking for the helmet that all the Crystal King drops. You're looking for all fights that you can bring along someone that wants all's bloodline, and they can come with you and they can fight all with you, and afterwards they can claim his bloodline. There's a whole bunch of things that you can do here. This, however, places completely different demands on your character to what we were talking about with the shallow fossil hunt, and you need something completely different for it. Here, you need to be a tanky build that has very high damage output. And for this, I would generally recommend mana stackers as something to investigate. So this is basically builds that use the Ivory Tower. That's a good starting point as something you might consider, or builds that use Archmage support. Both of these are worth your while looking into. There's lots of them you'll find on POE.ninja. The third delve option is hunting for the jewels that Golemancers sometimes want. Now, these come up in the suburbs of the various bosses, so the underground cities, but not from the bosses themselves, but from the side chambers that are found in city nodes that don't have a boss in them. Now, I believe depth 600 to be optimal here, but this time I am genuinely not sure. This is not something I've done. As for builds here, you still want to be tanky, you want some damage output, but you don't need to be quite as extreme as the builds that are doing a deep boss hunt. And for that reason, I just recommend any well-regarded hardcore build. Any of those will be something that you can consider here. And next it is time to curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal. The next mechanic we want to look at is betrayal, and here there are three main ways that you can go about this. Now, the second one of these is strictly better than the third one in terms of the output that you'll get, but the second one requires quite a bit of setup for it, and that's why I recommend the third one as well. So the first of these is simply farming Catarina herself. So this is going and taking on Catarina in her mastermind's lair, and then trying to get yourself Veiled Exalted Orbs, trying to get some of her boss drops. This is something that you can spam. It is very, very RNG. Most of the time, the market price balances out pretty well, so that a Syndicate Medallion is about 1/4 the value of a Veiled Exalt. So the Veiled Exalts you get, they pay for your entry fees, and then all of the Catarina loot is just bonus. However, you can also get very unlucky with this. You do need a bit of a currency pool behind you. One thing that tends to help here, though, is that Veiled Exalts and Syndicate Medallions explode in price early in a league. So early on, you'll be able to do this, and you might buy a few Syndicate Medallions, and you might have bought them at 1.7 Divines, and then it turns out that by the time you actually get around to running them, they might be then 2.3, because these are something that really go up. And Veiled Exalt will follow that up. So that's the strategy there. It's basically just farming the same boss on repeat. After this, we have the two different ways of doing Safehouses. The first one is the more optimized form, and this is the 2255 or 5522 strategy. This is something that you will need to search up an extensive guide for. I do not have one of these, but the things you want to target farm with this strategy. This strategy got giga buffed in patch 3.28, and the reason for that is that It That Fled was granted a very, very significant divination card. This divination card, the Eye of Terror, is something that turns in a set of 8 for a Foulborn Mageblood. Now, Foulborn Mageblood is effectively equivalent to a normal Mageblood, and this is the more target farmable of the two Mageblood divination cards. So, this divination card is the primary reward. On top of this, there's also a number of other mechanics. I'm just going to mention that this exists, and if you are interested in doing it, then what I suggest that you do is you build a Slammer build that has some degree of tankiness to them and has chaos resistance. So that could, for example, be a Juggernaut Slams build is one thing that would work there. Or you could just make a Berserker, but just make sure that you do get that chaos resistance in there. The reason I named chaos resistance is twofold. The first one is that Tora does modest chaos damage herself and also tends to bring allies with her that do considerable chaos damage. And It That Fled deals considerable chaos damage by itself, but also brings along friends that do more chaos damage again. So Betrayal, definitely something that pressures your chaos resistance a bit. After this, we have the casual safe house approach. Here, you don't really take any optimized strategy. You don't follow that 5522 guide. Instead, you just do whatever feels right at the time. This will still work. It is less efficient than the last strategy. It will be far worse at getting It That Fled encounters to get It That Fled's divination card, but it will also be slightly worse, but not actually much worse, just slightly worse than the amount of Syndicate Medallions per hour that you would get from the other strategy. So this works. It's a few percent worse, but it also doesn't require investing a couple of hours in setting it up. And next we have something that is completely and utterly new. This is a divination card strategy that is very, very specific to Trade League. So near Atlas North, there is a new cluster that's been added whereby you can cause a Scrying Orb to drop. This largely replaces the way that the Nameless Seer used to interact with Scrying. The Nameless Seer still exists, he'll still give you a unique item, but he's no longer going to be in charge of setting up scries on your atlas. Instead, that's going to come down to scrying orbs. Scrying orbs remember the map that they are dropped in, and you can use them or another player can use them to set up a scry. So one possible strategy is that you might farm scrying orbs in maps that no one wants to run, but maps that have very, very, very premium divination cards. This would be a strategy where you are doing a boss rush on a map, but it will be a boss rush on a map that drops scrying orbs and that has really, really good divination cards. So here, what do you want to pair this with? Probably either Ynda or Exarch invite in generation and heist. This would feel like the right thing to do from my perspective. But this has a couple of open questions with it. The first one, is there a market for these scrying orbs, or do people just get their own really quickly because there's only 25 maps on average? The second question is, can you scry nightmares or guardian maps? I expect the answer to this to be no, you can't do that in the current state of the game, but it is definitely something that is worth checking out. Aspects of characters that are pressured here because there's a boss rush strategy, you kind of want some soft bossing, and you also want movement speed. And again, I'm inclined to say that the premium build to do this on would be a Berserker Slam build, but lots of other things, because the demands on your character are not very high, lots of other things are capable of doing this too. Right, so next we're going to be talking about a mechanic that has many different ways to play around with it. This is Kalguuran Ore. I have 7 different strategies, and they're not all very different to each other, but there are 7 of them, and they are somewhat different to each other at least. The first one, though, is a real outlier. This is using Kalguuran Ores to add Bismuth to your map in order to act as a loot multiplier for everything else that you're doing on that map. Now, what you want to do here is run 8 mod maps with this, and you want to be doing this alongside slow events that have very heavy investment. You want an astrolabe that fits the other slow events that you've got. As an example here, you might run this alongside a breach fortress strategy, or alongside an ultimatum strategy, or alongside really anything else. But use an astrolabe that fits the other content that you're running, and spend a long time in each map. But when you do find that Bismuth encounter, tap it immediately, because it is going to then empower both the difficulty and the loot of every single magic and rare monster that is still alive in the map. Here, all you're doing from the Kalguuran perspective is you're just setting up your atlas to have Bismuth on it, biased towards Bismuth, quite a few Kalguuran ores, and maybe you use 1 Kalguuran Scarab on average. That's going to be something that you'll have to experiment with. Here, though, you do need a pretty powerful character for this, because you are going to want to be doing this on tier 16 8 modded maps. After this, though, we have a lot of faster strategies. So, Kalguuran Ore, you can bias these in favor of Verizium. If you do this, then you can Svallin hunt. Svallin is an item that everyone always wants. This is a strategy where you are spending as little time in each map as possible. You are looking for 2 things. You are firstly looking for the map boss and you're slaying them, and you're potentially getting an astrolabe from them, or potentially getting credit towards a Searing Exarch or Eater of Worlds invite. But at the same time, you are also looking for a Verizium pile. If you find it, you can leave the map. And that's because there can only be 1 Verizium encounter in a map, and sometimes your Verizium encounter will RNG upgrade to a Starfall Crater. When you do find a Starfall Crater, go in there and slay the Black Knight. He is a boss. He is not very hard, and although this is something where you want some soft bossing ability, you don't want to do this on like the very slowest boss killers around. You don't need to be a super powerful character either. Now, the big open question here is whether people want to consume Svallin in enshrouding items. If that's the case, then this is going to be a spectacular strategy, because the richest players in the game, they're going to be buying every Svallin they can get their hands on, and it's kind of going to suck for those of you that want to just get a Svallin to use. But that's going to be what happens if Svallin is good at enshrouding. If it is not good at enshrouding, then the item will be cheaper, this strategy will be less effective, but at the same time, it will be good news for those of you that want a Svallin to just use it as it is. The build I'd recommend here is a balance of movement speed and soft bossing, and that is a Berserker Slam build. But you don't have to use that. You can use lots of other things, like you could use a Pathfinder instead. After this, there's a couple of ones that are shipment related. They are, however, different to each other. The first one is spamming shipments. Now, this is a medium investment strategy, and here you are going to be using a mythic scarab called Kalguuran Scarab of Refinement. What this does is it upgrades all of the metal that will drop whenever you do anything that rewards Kalguuran metal, it will upgrade that to already smelted bars. Now this saves you two things. Firstly, it saves you a bunch of gold. But secondly, and more importantly, because this is a very rare scarab, this is also going to allow you to bypass all of the time gating that is associated with the Settlers mechanic. And this allows you to send very, very large shipments chasing mirror shards, and to do so quicker than you otherwise would be able to. So, this is a strategy that is very, very viable. However, the supply game-wide of Kalguuran Scarabs of Refinement is not all that big, given that a small number of people doing this strategy, they can use like 20 of the same mythic scarab each per hour. So if you've got 10 people doing this, suddenly you're depleting the stockpiles by 200 every single hour. And yeah, sure, plenty of people are dropping this scarab, but it's not one of the most valuable scarabs in the game, so it's not something that every casual player gets a tink and they're like, oh, I better go and check what that's worth. Instead, they usually get something that's a step down from a tink, whatever a 30 or 40 chaos sound is on their loot filter. And then they're like, oh, that's cool. Maybe when I've got 6 of them, I'll sell them. But if they're a casual player, they never get 6 because it's a mythic scarab. So that's something you want to keep in mind there. That is something that I think your best bet is builds with fantastic damage projection in order to do this effectively. Penance Brand Ignite, Righteous Fire Chieftain, these are a couple of examples, but there's plenty more. You could play a bow build, lots of things that can do these well. The next strategy is the same thing, except with one difference. You don't use the mythic scarab, the Kalguuran Scarab of Refinement. Here you are time gated. You can literally only do this strategy about 60 or 70 maps a week. Beyond that, you will end up just with a stockpile of ores that you just cannot smelt. So this is something that has a hard time gate on it. And if you want to bypass that time gate, you are absolutely required to upgrade to using the Kalguuran Scarab of Refinement. Otherwise though, the same rewards apply. When you send a 50 million shipment off, there's a reasonably good chance to get 1 or more mirror shards from it. In the past, we've had pretty good numbers on exactly the sort of numbers that you could expect. Nowadays, we don't have such good numbers, or at least there's none that I'm so sure about, but it does seem that it is definitely a more than 50% chance that if you send a pure metal, mixture of metal, but a purely metal set of shipments off, then, and that shipment is 50 million, then you will get at least 1 mirror shard back at least 50% of the time. Otherwise, you can use Kalguuran ore just as generic juice. This is something that you can kind of do with a bunch of other mechanics as well, but Kalguuran ore is really good with it. This is not taking it as far as you do with the Bismuth juicing strategy. You're just going and, like, when you find one of the Crimson Iron encounters, you're blowing it up because there's just so many monsters that come out of it. When you encounter one of the Amber encounters, they don't drop all that much normal game loot, but there is some. You're just basically going and killing those monsters when they show up. This can be done in conjunction with altars plus anything really, and it's something that, again, high damage projection is what you want for. For Kalguuran ore, there is also a tattoo hunt strategy. Now, the tattoo hunt strategy involves speccing the node lost shipments on your atlas, and then just basically optimizing to get as many of these lost shipments as you can. This pairs very well with Heist and other really fast things, rewards movement speed, and so Pathfinders are really good at it, but also things like Berserker Slam are pretty good too as well. And finally, there is hunting down quotas. This is something that may or may not work. It is very economy dependent. Those of you that play in solo self-found though, you might be forced to do this for a little while if you want certain unique items. There are a small subset of unique items that can only be generated through the use of the Settlers mechanics, specifically sending off a boat and having that boat return with that as your unique. Ynda's stand is the one that is the highest profile of these, and if you're interested in doing this, then you are going to need to learn all of the mechanics of how Ynda's stand drops, and also why you might want to actually turn in your Ynda's stand potential shipments on an alt with a very, very carefully curated level range. I believe it's 56 to 64, but I could be wrong on that. So don't take my word for it. Go and check POE Wiki's entry for Ynda's stand if you're interested in doing that. This, however, is going to require a lot of gold because you're going to need to be running farmers as well. None of the other strategies involving Kalguuran ore reward farmers in any particular way, but this one does. So keep that one in mind. Next, it's time to party like it is 3.17. Searing Exarch, invite generation, Eater of Worlds, invite generation. Here, the goal is to run maps fast. get to the bosses, but you actually only need to get to the boss if it is the 28th map, and potentially the 14th one as well, depending on whether there's demand for the intermediate bosses in that given league. That will come down to the challenges. Now, broadly speaking, you will want to do this with the Searing Exarch. The reason for this is that people who are using the altars as generic juice for other strategies, they tend to favor the Eater of Worlds. As a result, there are more Eater of Worlds invites that are getting produced by players who are not running this strategy. And because of the nature of Forbidden Jewels, there's actually a balance to having an equilibrium here. You do actually want to have both Searing Exarch and Eater of Worlds Forbidden Jewels in roughly equal quantities. If there was a massive discrepancy one way or the other, then the Forbidden Jewels would cease to be loot on the side that there were lots of them because you couldn't pair them off. So, Searing Exarch tends to be better, but sometimes economies are weird, so definitely keep an eye on both options. Here, go into the map. Run around until you set off one of the Searing Exarch piles of monsters, and once you verify that those monsters have spawned, you can actually leave if you want. Or you can kill through the map quickly, and then you can go on to the next map. This really rewards movement speed. You've just got to be able to kill the map boss of the 28th map. If your character is really, really weak because you've optimized too much for movement speed, you can even do that in a scoured encounter. So that's the Exarch invitation and the Eater invite generation. The next option is something that is much more juice oriented, and that is Searing Exarch altars or Eater of Worlds altars, optimizing for these somewhat. This tends to go well with other strategies that involve some degree of juice, but what you will want to do for both of these strategies is using the Influence Scarab of Hordes. This adds 40% to the size of the packs of your influence monsters, but that also increases the chances of getting additional altars to spawn. Most of the time, the Eater of Worlds is the more lucrative of these, but there is absolutely nothing wrong with picking the Searing Exarch because your build is better at it. Which of these is better depends on the defenses that you've got. If you want to focus on Searing Exarch altars though, the absolute god tier suggestion here is the Righteous Fire Chieftain. The Righteous Fire Chieftain has a node that prevents monsters' resistances rising above -20 in certain circumstances. It actually overwrites them to -20. Now, the Searing Exarch altars, there's a lot of them that will turbocharge a monster's resistances, not just into the 75 range, but actually massively overcapped, like they can be 180%, 200%. So they're massively overcapped. At that point, having Rumiko Sun's Light is absolutely god tier. But on top of that, the Righteous Fire Chieftain is very good defensively at just mitigating fire damage and at having a tremendous amount of overcap fire resistance. If you are doing this though, I recommend that you put more investment into chaos resistance than normal. You don't just want to have 75% chaos resistance, you want to be somewhat overcapped. It's good to have like 100, 105%. That way, if you tap an altar that gives you -50, it's not lights out, it's just a nuisance. You will feel squishier if you go from 75% effective chaos res against 105% uncapped, and then you end up going down to say 52%, but you're not going to feel terribly squishy. For the Eater of Worlds options though, things are quite different, and there's a lot of builds that function well against every single Eater altar except for one mod. And then there's just one or two mods that will just mess with you. So it's going to depend upon the rest of your strategy, what aspects of your character will be pressured. But broadly speaking, the Eater of Worlds ones, you'll get a bit of a feel for it over time, and you should be considering whether your build is good at Eater of Worlds altars or not when you're deciding what exactly you want to roll up there. Next up, it's time to talk about boss killing. There are two boss killing strategies that don't involve mapping that I want to mention here. The first one is Pinnacle boss carries. Now, it's important to note that just buying invites for the Maven and running the Maven back to back to back to back to back, this is not something that is profitable early in the game. The reason for that is that people who are doing carry services are bidding up the price of the entry tokens, and they simply get more out of it than you do. What you want to do here is sell carries to the boss's voidstone. This is something you can do either in the in-game chat channel, Trade 820, or on the Forbidden Trode Discord, or in a couple of other services Discords that popped up during a period where there was a whole bunch of drama with TFT last league. So there's a number of places you can do this, but the Trade 820 is probably the easiest one to access. It does have a higher risk of scam, but it is still a pretty low risk of scam. And you're not going to be out that much if you do get scammed once or twice here and there. Now, this requires you to be cool under pressure, and I think the best build for this is a Trapper. The other option that you've got though, and this one does involve just doing bosses by yourself, this is Uber Pinnacle Boss Farming. This is something where you might actually generate astrolabes if you're killing the incarnations, but you're going to be just simply targeting Uber Pinnacle drops while there are not very many of them in circulation. Here, you're going to be buying Nightmare Map fragments from other players, and most likely you're actually not playing a build that's good at farming those Nightmare Map fragments up yourself. Again though, you just want to be cool under pressure, and you probably want to play a Trapper so that you can just burst the boss down before it gets to do any of its really scary mechanics. That said, you can play a Giga Tanked build as well. They are also very good on Uber Pinnacle bosses, but they're just different strategies. And I decided to shift things around a little bit in the sheet and talk about Nightmare Map boss rushing now as another strategy that is related to these boss approaches. So this is a mapping strategy, but it's one where you are farming difficult bosses in order to get Uber Pinnacle boss fragments. Now, these, you're going to require Nightmare maps for these. These are the maps that are formerly known as Tier 17 maps, although they are now Tier 16 again. This is something that can be done with pretty much any strategy, but the big decision you've got to make. Option 1, you go in and you use the dextral and sinistral scarabs in order to effectively scour the map. In this approach, you are going to get less loot, but you're going to have a much easier time doing it. Normally, this strategy is still profitable. You are getting less loot per map though, so do keep an eye on the economy. The other approach, and this one's also worth your while considering, is that you might decide to juice these maps instead. So you can do either of these things. Everything about your character is going to be pressured with this. There's going to be pressuring how cool you are under pressure, because some of the map mods that are found in these Nightmare maps can be quite mean. There's going to be bosses that do all sorts of scary things and generally have enough hit points that they actually do get to do a lot of things to you. There's going to be big hits, and there's also going to be hard to dodge things. Generally, you want to be playing a meta build that is an all-rounder in order to do this. The next three strategies I wanted to mention are ones we don't know very much about yet, and that is the new Mercenaries mechanic. There are three ways that I can think of to use this. The first one is to go into maps looking for the mercenary in order to beat them up and take their rucksack currency. Now, here I think you just want fast maps, and I think this is best in conjunction with other fast events. But the open question is, are mercenary rucksacks as juicy as they were in 3.26 or not? If they're not, this is going to be a flop. In terms of the way that you would go about building a character for this, I would just take a look at hardcore builds. You want to be tanky, you want to have good single target damage, but have a look at hardcore builds that are good at bosses. For the second option, it's going to be to look for popular warrants. Now, I think the infamous Kineticist is going to be the most popular of these, but that could easily change, especially as guides come out. Here, you want to go through, do these fast maps, and really this is going to be very similar to the rucksack currency approach as well. You just require slightly different nodes on your atlas. Of course, you can take every mercenary node, and then you'll be able to jump between the two. The third one of these, though, is something I think people have been sleeping on. In 3.26, I don't think it was ever well documented, but it was certainly my experience that unique items that dropped from the mercenaries had very lucky divine rolls. By far the best Venter's Gamble I've ever seen drop came from a mercenary, but so too did by far the second best Venter's Gamble I've ever seen drop. And during that league, you'd find there were very cheap, very good Venter's Gambles, despite the item being just as good as it is now. And that was because it seemed like mercenaries could give items that had a lot of different axes of scaling, could just get lucky on all of them simultaneously. If it is still a case that mercenary uniques are ultra well rolled, then one thing you might want to consider doing is running the Trathan Scarab of Renown. This is something that was alluded to in the patch notes, and it will cause your mercenaries to have every single item be unique. Now, firstly, you're going to look for really valuable uniques. There probably won't be any, but if you do see a Venter's Gamble or something else that has a really wide range of rolls, definitely look into it. Most of the time it's going to be trash, but sometimes it'll be exactly what you're after. Once more, just play any hardcore build here because mercenaries are rippy. And if you do lose to a mercenary, you've lost to them. You're not able to then challenge them again. Next up, we have a section with three different mechanics, but they're actually quite similar to each other in terms of the demands they place on your character, or at least we think the character demands are going to be similar in Abyss to what they were before. Abyss might end up being wrong here, but Abyss, breach hives and fortresses, unstable breaches, expedition with a focus on Rog. These are 4 different encounters, but all of them really, really reward kill propagation through packs. Very, very, very dense packs of monsters where you want to cause one monster to explode and to inflict ignites that then spread throughout everything else. Now, I think that the S tier build for most of these is probably going to end up being Righteous Fire Chieftain, but sometimes it's going to be Penance Brand Ignite, sometimes it's going to be something else. Broadly speaking, though, you want to be propagating damage throughout packs as effectively as possible, and that will deal with all of these categories. Now, it's worth noting that with Abyss, there's going to be a lot of exploration to be done because the mechanic has had such a thoroughgoing overhaul. It's got new scarabs, it's got all sorts of new things to learn about it. With Breach, there were big nerfs to it, but that doesn't actually matter because it's got unique loot. So there's going to be things that people definitely want from it. And on top of that, Expedition is one of those things that if you know how to use it well, then it's something that can be very lucrative. But like Betrayal, it's something that you need to really, really invest in learning. One thing I will say about that Expedition though, Gwenin, Tuadh, just don't bother with them. It is very much about Rog now. That's because Tuadh had a bunch of things taken from him in previous patches, and Gwenin had a lot of stuff taken from her in a very early patch. Gwenin went from a strong option to a weak one, and Tuadh went from a reasonably strong down to quite weak as well. Rog, though, if it's very early in the league, you can make a lot of currency out of him if you know exactly what you're doing. Next, we're going to jump over to Harvest. Now, with Harvest, there are 3 different ways that you can play this strategy. There is the crop rotation strategy, there is the basic strategy, and there is the Harvest Scarab of Cornucopia strategy. Now, if you are using the Harvest Scarab of Cornucopia, the astrolabe becomes mandatory. If you are using crop rotation, the astrolabe becomes derisory. You don't really benefit from it at all. It's just going to make things harder. It's not really going to add much loot, so you can easily skip it. If you're going for the basic strategy, you can use it or not as you see fit. A doubling scarab is mandatory for everything, and the Harvest Scarab of Cornucopia is something that is used in exactly one of these. Now, a couple of things you want to be aware of here build-wise. You really want the ability to deal with multiple bosses at once when you are either doing the Cornucopia strategy or when you're doing the crop rotation strategy. For that reason, I'm going to recommend Kinetic Fusillade Totems. Kinetic Fusillade Totems is incredibly good at allowing you to drop down a lot of deadly stuff, then trigger the spawn of bosses, and then even if there are multiple bosses, you are dealing your full DPS to all of them at a time. This is really, really useful. That said, you can also do this with slams if you prefer. There's lots of other choices. The basic strategy for Harvest puts much lower demands on your character, and so you can kind of get away with anything there. Now, if you do go with the Cornucopia strategy, expect to be spending quite a bit of time in maps, and as a result, you don't want to be adding anything that's going to be adding a lot of time to your maps. So don't pair this with something like Incursion that's going to add a bunch of time to your maps. Instead, pair it with something like Heist. Pair it with something like Searing Exarch Altars or Eater of Worlds Altars. In fact, those altars are exceptionally good in conjunction with Harvest. Next up, we have 3 ways to deal with the Delirium mechanic. The first of them is Simulacrum Farming. Here, you need a build that specializes in recovery, in damage avoidance, in having medium levels of DPS. You don't need a tremendous amount. And ultimately, Cast When Stunned Chieftain is the best option here. This is going to be the best way to get voices. It's the only way to get the unique cluster jewels like voices. And it's also going to be the best way to get item level 84 cluster jewels. There is also Delirium Mirror Farming, and there is using Delirium as generic juice. So the Delirium Mirror Farming, you're trying to generate as many Simulacrum Splinters and Delirium Orbs as you can, that you can then go and sell on to other players. This is something that can be quite good, but it also requires you to be slow immune, it requires you to have good damage while you are mobile, and ideally you'll have freeze proliferation. It's not mandatory to have that, but it is really good to have that. For Delirium as generic juice, it's going to depend a bit upon the rest of your strategy, but it is something that does put some pretty substantial demands on your character, especially as you start getting to higher levels of Delirium, whether that be using a 4th or 5th Delirium Orb on your maps, or whether that be through the use of the Delirium Mirror and just pushing right to the end of the map while it is still active. The next thing I want to talk about is using Beyond as generic juice. Now, this is not a strategy that goes on its own. This is something you layer on top of one of the other strategies we've already discussed, and you want to layer this on top of something that's already pretty juicy. For example, maybe you're doing an Eater of Worlds plus Breach strategy, and then you're feeling strong enough to layer Beyond and Delirium on as well. What you will be doing here is primarily using Beyond Scarab of the Invasion. This Scarab provides a tremendous explosion to the number of monsters that are present on that map. So this strategy pairs very well with high juice setups. It's pretty bad otherwise. And I think a big question that's open about this, because Beyond monsters don't provide all that much loot on their own. They might end up getting the pack gems. They probably do end up getting the pack gems, but do the things that are uniquely from Beyond hold value or not? If they do, this could be quite good. So that is definitely tainted currency, and it is also potentially these pack gems. One last thing I'll mention, Grinding Gear Games have gone and nerfed the drop rates of all of the most common of the tainted currency. The way I believe this works, and I'm not sure of this, but I believe that what this means is that the currencies that were rarer in the tainted pool now actually are more likely to roll. For example, it's like if they were to go and remove 10% movement speed from boots as a roll, that would make 35% slightly more likely to roll because something's been removed from the pool. So what's happened here is that tainted chromatic orbs were made substantially rarer this patch. They've already said that. And in a previous patch, they made armorer's scraps and also blacksmith's whetstones substantially rarer as well, the tainted versions of those. So these were three of the most common currencies. The only one of them that remains common now, as far as I'm aware, is the Jeweler's Orb. And what this means is that the Tainted Divine Teardrop, which is the main reward for Beyond, the main sort of jackpot reward, it's still going to be very rare, but it might actually be substantially more common than it's been in the past. But that all depends upon the exact implementation of how Grinding Gear Games decide to nerf the drop rate of the Tainted Chrome. They might instead decide that they're just going to distribute that to some of the other more common currency items instead. Next, we're going to talk about mechanics that allow you to run around in a circle fighting monsters, or in the case of the last one, run around a very tight area fighting monsters. Ultimatum, Ritual, and Blight. All of these, I believe, work their very best when you're playing a build that has Hinekora explosions, i.e. a chieftain, and that is propagating ignites. However, for Ultimatum, it's probably the cast while stun variant because you need to have a lot of recovery as well. For the Ritual and Blight options, Righteous Fire Chieftain is fine, as is cast when stunned. Cast when stunned might struggle a bit with Blight, but also in Ritual, you definitely want Chaos Resistance. And that's really all there is to say here. For Ultimatum, there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. You can farm Catalysts, you can farm Inscribed Ultimatums, and there is a very important 5-for-1 vendor recipe on Inscribed Ultimatums. There is a lot to learn about that. So definitely do some research if you're wanting to do that. Or alternately, you can hunt for 2 implicit rares that have really good potential to Mythic Orb into something that is a 2 implicit corrupted unique. That's something that's definitely worth your while looking for, but it requires you to be able to recognize potential jackpot bases, things that are worth throwing a Tainted Mythic Orb at. Ritual, unfortunately, lost a lot with patch 3.29. It's lost its synthesized items, and as a result, you're mostly chasing those King in the Mist drops. They're pretty good, but they aren't up there with what you've lost in the synthesized items. And also with the King in the Mist drop, the most high profile of those is the Jewel. And that Jewel, there are Divination cards that grant it, and they're not as rare as you might expect. So the open question here is, can anything that's added to Ritual in this patch, if there is anything, make up for the lost there? And I'm not sure that that's going to happen. As for Blight, there might be a little bit less demand than usual, and that's because the talismans that are coming out of Bestiary now, they do not use oils. So that might reduce the demand for Blight, but at the same time, maybe it also means fewer people are farming it. And now that we're getting close to the end, I wanted to group together 4 different strategies that are all about producing maps. The first one is generic 8-mod map generation, and this is something that just involves running 8-mod maps and doing so in conjunction with the Cartography Scarab of Corruption, Cartography Scarab of Escalation, and 3 copies of the Cartography Scarab of the Multitude. Now, usually you can do this at any juice level. You do need to start with an 8-mod map. It'll be much better if you've got one, but you can add on a whole bunch of extra layers if you want. Altars, Generic Monster Edition, Abyss, Breach, all these sorts of things. But one thing you'll get for free is Originator map generation, and we'll talk about that one in a sec. The main difficulty here is going to be dealing with a wide variety of map mods because you're producing a bunch of maps that can't be altered. Now, obviously, if you're in Trade League, you can sell the ones you can't do, or at least you can list them for sale and hope someone buys them. But because of the changes that have been made to Reflect in the patch notes, you might actually be able to do Reflect mods you previously couldn't. There is a very slight alteration you can make to this as well. You can drop one of those Cartography Scarabs of the Multitude and substitute a Delirium Scarab of Delusions. If you do this, it's basically the same strategy, except you'll get a smaller number of maps, but they will have a random number of layers of Delirium pre-applied to them. Most of the time, this will be 1 or 2. Often it'll be 3. Occasionally it'll be 4. Seldom it will be 5. But it does add up, and this is something that can be really good if you're looking to run delirious maps. If you feel like you're looking for a bit of an extra challenge, this might be the best way to just make maps for yourself. Another thing that's important, if you do take this, you want to take the Originator map generation nodes that are in Tree North, and also at the same time, you also want to probably take the Incarnation Invitation farming nodes as well. And that will help you get a lot of things together in the same clusters. Destructive Play is next. Now, Destructive Play generates 2 different things. Firstly, it generates a bunch of Atlas mini-boss maps. This is my term for Shaper Guardian maps, Elder Slayer maps, all that fun stuff. Elder Guardians, Synthesis Guardians, etc., etc. You'll generate a bunch of these just by random mapping, and that can be in tier 16 maps, or you can do it in some of these special maps like the Shaper Guardian maps themselves. On top of that, you'll also be getting Maven Splinters. The harder the maps that you're doing this in, the more of those splinters you'll be able to get, but you'll also need to defeat harder invitations. So this becomes a strategy that you can scale as you keep working on it. Now, something I really like pairing with Destructive Play on the Atlas is Shrines. Shrines are fantastic here because they give you some borrowed power that mean that some of these bosses that you get to at the end of the map, they can just be quicker to slay when you get to them. Even though you can probably beat them just fine without the shrines are maybe the difference between slaying them in 25 seconds and slaying them in 7 seconds. The key thing you want here is 3+ target damage projection. That is the aspect of your character that will be most pressured here, and this is why I want to recommend Kinetic Fusillade Totems again here. Dealing full damage to multiple targets simultaneously is great. You can do slams instead, you can do a bunch of other things, but KF Totems feel really good here. The other thing that you can do, though, is create those invitations that allow you to take on the incarnations. So this is just about zipping through maps really quickly, looking for Egon. When you find Egon, yoink one of those invitation threads off him, and then just stash it, because they no longer just get automatically applied to your Atlas. You then have the flexibility to apply them when you're ready for them. Now you can run these, and that's something else that you can farm, or you can just turn around and sell them to other players. Most of the time, the ones to the Incarnation of Dread do tend to sell. The one to the Incarnation of Neglect never really sells. And the one to the Incarnation of Fear, it kind of depends on the day of the week and the mood that people are in. But the Incarnation of Dread one is good, and you want to use the nodes up at the Tree North that bias away from the other 2, so that you bias towards the Incarnation of Dread. So we're going to finish with 8 last strategies, 4 of which are in maps and 4 of which are not. The 4 that are in maps are very much miscellaneous ones, so I want to just start with stack deck farming. This is all about a single scarab called the Divination Scarab of the Cloister. It is imperative that you use these 5 at a time. The reason for that is that each one of them adds packs of monsters, but also scales up the chance of those dropping stack decks by a percentage point for all of the packs, not just the ones that are provided by that new scarab. So the final scarab that you put in is actually worth more than half as much as the first 4 combined. This one pairs best with fast events and altars, and ultimately it pressures something weird about your characters. It pressures your ability to handle proximity shields, because all of the monsters that are added by Divination Scarab of the Cloister have the capacity to put up a proximity shield around themselves. For this reason, I tend to recommend Righteous Fire Chieftain. It's not the only build that can cope with these, but it is very, very good at doing so. After this, we have Strongboxes. This is another mapping strategy, and it's one where the target loot is corrupted 6 links, it is raw currency, and it is divination cards. But honestly, it is those corrupted 6 links that you probably will get the most of. It's also been the case in previous leagues sometimes, and this was definitely the case in 328. Sometimes there are special Strongboxes that are available, but We don't know that they're going to exist in this league. The way that they existed in 328 does not exist in 329, so keep that in mind. You may or may not want to use Ambush Scarab of Containment here. That one tends to be expensive, especially if there's any meta strategy around strongboxes. Now, this pairs exceptionally well with mechanics that don't require scarabs, because strongboxes, this mechanic is a scarab hog. This mechanic wants all of your scarab slots. It would love to have more scarab slots than you can get. So you want to pair it with things that don't require scarabs like Heist, or things that just at least function, that might get better with scarabs. So for instance, Eldritch Altars are elevated by the presence of a scarab, but they don't absolutely require them. Now there is an open question here. We have had confirmed in the Ziggy D Q&A that if you have a 6-socketed item that is not 6-linked, which would normally vendor for 7 Jeweler's Orbs, but it is also a chromatic recipe, then the chromatic recipe dominates. So 1 chrome dominates over 7 Jeweler's Orbs. We have not had clarification on what happens if the item is simultaneously 6-linked and also chromatic, whether you get 20 fusings or 1 chrome. And ultimately, we don't know which of these would be the more desirable outcome either. In terms of the things that are pressured on your characters here, it is your capacity to preload damage, to set up a kill zone for monsters that are spawned. And I think the Righteous Fire Chieftain takes the cake here, especially if you're playing the variants that use Fire Trap. So you can drop down Fire Traps, then you can tap that Strongbox, and as the Strongbox spawns, all the monsters appear, and they just pretty much die immediately to your Fire Trap. The other thing that the RF Chieftain is really good at here, these tend to retaliate, these Strongboxes, and one of the most dangerous retaliations they do is an Ice Nova. The thing is, the Chieftain has 90% resistance against cold, and as a result, that Ice Nova just tickles them. So they're pretty fine if there is a retaliatory explosion as well. Essences are next. Essences are kind of weird. Here, you don't engage with the astrolabe system at all because you're probably doing this in tier 6 maps. That has been the historic optimized strategy for essences. Here, you want to just look around for essence encounters. You want to add more of them to your maps through the use of Essence Scarabs and Essence Scarabs of Ascent. You might elect to use Essence Scarab of Calcification, but that thing is rare and expensive. And you just want to do fast maps unless you're doing Calcification. Now, this is going to tie up all of your Scarab slots, even as it is. You would kind of like to have the Essence Scarab of Stability. You would kind of like to use that, but often you don't have space for it. So you want to pair this in conjunction with things that don't require Scarabs like Heist. The aspects of your characters that are pressured are soft bossing. And here, I think this is another job where Berserker Slams are particularly good, but really any slam build can do this well. But it's not the only thing. You can do it on Kinetic Fusillade Totems, and you can do it on a Pathfinder that's adapted to do a bit more damage, that's just movement speed oriented. Finally, this one I probably don't recommend unless the league economy is a bit weird, but you can go into maps and you can spec the Trial of Glory cluster on the Atlas. This will cause any of the Labyrinth trials that spawn in your areas. Firstly, you'll get a lot more Labyrinth trials, but on top of that, they'll have a chance to be elevated to an enhanced offering to the goddess. There are 3 different enhanced ones. There is the gift to the goddess, there is a tribute to the goddess, there is a dedication to the goddess. Usually only the gift is worth a lot. The dedication can be worth something, and the tribute has been in the dumpster for quite a while. Now, with these, you do not need to enter into the Labyrinth trial unless it is one that has an upgraded offering. You won't know which upgraded offering you're going to get, but you will know that you're getting an upgraded offering before you step in there. So that's something that's quite good. It's only a few points on the Atlas, and it's something that you can do on any fast-moving build, and you can just add this in if you just happen to have a few points and you're not looking for something that multiplies all of the other loot. So you're not doing a super juice strategy. It is something that's fine. It's just not something that's particularly popular most of the time. And to finish off, we're going to talk about 4 things that take place off the Atlas. Firstly, we have the Forbidden Sanctum. The Forbidden Sanctum is now the home of the Volatile Varlorb. It is the home of some genuinely in-demand unique items, and it is also one of the better places, but not as ridiculous as it used to be, for getting raw Divine Orbs. Now, historically, builds that have been popular in the Sanctum have changed, but one thing they've always had, they've had the ability to preload damage and to deal burst damage while you are moving. Penance Brand of Dissipation is excellent at this. Shockwave Totem is excellent at this. There are also some Trappers and Miners that can work in there, but this is something that is quite difficult to take a generic mapping build into and to succeed in. And the thing that makes this really interesting is that a lot of those generic mapping builds, they actually want one of the things that comes out of the Sanctum. What they want is the Lycia bloodline. So you want to keep that in mind. There will be demand from people who want you to carry them so that they can get the Lycia bloodline from the end boss. Keep that in mind. That can be another source of profit from the Sanctum as well. After this, we have Veldo maps. These are a complete and utter wild card. These are so different to everything else in the game that they really do need their own video entirely. And there are some good videos on them. I don't have one, but there are a bunch of good videos about them. Ultimately, though, Veldo maps can be much harder than they look, and they are also the highest risk encounters in all of Path of Exile as well, because some of them have a mod. It'll be clearly displayed if it's there, but some of them have a mod whereby your character is entirely deleted if they're slain inside the map. So it's basically an even harder version of the hardcore rule set. After this, the final thing I want to round it out with is being a lab rat. There are two ways you can be a lab rat. I guess there's kind of three. You could farm the level 68 one, but I probably wouldn't advise it. Either farm the level 75 labyrinth or farm one of the level 83 labyrinths. Now, the level 83 labyrinths, you have the Gift to the Goddess is the one that has the obvious effect. It just lets you use the labyrinth enchantment device a lot more times. The Dedication one has some very, very narrow market holes that come up. The Dedication Labyrinth is the hardest of them all to complete, and that's because the traps are giga-juiced in it. But the payoff for doing so can be quite good, but you need to pay very close attention to what gems are in demand, because sometimes one of the Divination cards that exists, there's a few of them that award 21, 23 gems. They can be extremely, extremely lucrative if you take them into these dedication labs and then swap them into different 21, 23 gems, ones that happen to be in more demand. Cough, cough, Divination card, Terrible Secret of Space. This one can provide a whole bunch of Golem gems at 21, 23 that people aren't interested in, but a number of them will be transfigured already. And if you take these into a dedication labyrinth, they will end up turning into a different 21, 23 transfigured gem, which can be something that is quite valuable sometimes. You still need to get lucky, but that can be something that's very good if you know the details of exactly how that craft works. If you don't though, the gifts one is great, or you can just do the level 75 labyrinth. People are going to want their transfigured gems all league, and so this is something that can be occasionally lucrative. Anyways, thank you for watching this entire massive marathon. This has been several hours work while I've been sitting here. After I originally wrote it, I was then just recording it section by section, then cutting it all down. So it's been a whole bunch of fun to put together, but I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlorbs have interesting results. And if you want to download the current version of this spreadsheet after it's actually been adapted a couple of times while I've been recording this video, I'll put it on my blog, sirgog.com.